Welcome back, everyone. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, because what I'm about to share with you today is one of those stories that is going to stay with you long after the video ends. We're talking about love found in the most impossible circumstances, sacrifice that will bring you to tears, and a request so unexpected, so breathtaking, that when I first heard it, I had to sit down. So if you're ready, let's begin. His name was Daniel Mercer, and he was the kind of man who moved through the world quietly, carrying weight that most people never noticed. 34 years old, lean from years of early mornings and skipped lunches, with dark circles under his eyes that had become as permanent a feature as his jaw or his nose. He drove a 6-year-old pickup truck with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat permanently occupied by a booster seat that belonged to his 5-year-old daughter, Lily. He worked 10-hour days as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized import-export company called Halcyon Maritime, based in Tampa, Florida. And every single day, without exception, no matter how brutal the hours had been, he picked up Lily from Mrs. Patterson's house by 6 o'clock, cooked dinner with her sitting on the kitchen counter talking his ear off about whatever cartoon character had captured her imagination that week, gave her a bath, read her 2 books, never one, always 2, and tucked her in with a kiss on the forehead and the same words he said every night, "You are my whole world, Ladybug." He had been doing this alone for 3 years, ever since his wife, Carla, had walked out of their lives without much of an explanation beyond the phrase, "I'm not built for this." She had signed over full custody without a fight, which told Daniel everything he needed to know about how much she'd already checked out long before she physically left. He never spoke badly about Carla to Lily. He told his daughter that her mother loved her in her own way and that some people showed love differently. He said this while quietly aching with a rage and a grief that he kept sealed up so tight inside his chest that sometimes, late at night after Lily was asleep, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and just stare at the wall, breathing slowly, talking himself back from the edge of whatever dark place was always waiting at the periphery. He had friends, a few. His neighbor Marcus checked in on him. His mother called from Georgia every Sunday. But mostly, Daniel existed in the narrow corridor between work and fatherhood, moving back and forth between those 2 rooms with no space left over for anything else. He told himself this was enough. He told himself that Lily's happiness was more than enough reason to keep going. And he believed it most of the time. But there were moments, and he would never have admitted this to anyone, when he felt profoundly invisible, like a gear inside a machine that no one ever thought about as long as it kept turning. His boss was a woman named Victoria Hale. Cliffhanger 1. Stop right there. Because in approximately 3 days, Daniel Mercer and Victoria Hale would be standing on an uninhabited island in the Gulf of Mexico with no phone signal, no boat, no rescue in sight, and Victoria would say something to Daniel that would make him drop to his knees. But we have to go back first. We have to understand who these 2 people were before the island, because what happens between them only makes sense if you understand what they were each carrying. Victoria Hale was 41, and she ran Halcyon Maritime with the kind of precision that made people simultaneously admire and fear her. She was the daughter of the company's founder, Robert Hale, who had built the business from nothing over 30 years, and then handed it to his only child when he retired 5 years ago. Victoria had a reputation that preceded her like weather. She was known for being brilliant, demanding, exact, and utterly without sentimentality in the office. She wore her dark hair pulled back so severely that newer employees sometimes wondered if it was physically uncomfortable. She spoke in complete, perfectly constructed sentences. She never raised her voice, which somehow made her corrections more devastating than shouting would have been. She was the kind of woman who, when she walked into a room, caused a subtle shift in everyone's posture. What most people at Halcyon Maritime did not know about Victoria Hale, what only her assistant, a kind older woman named Peggy, partially suspected, was that Victoria was sick. She had been diagnosed 14 months earlier with a rare autoimmune condition affecting her heart called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It had progressed faster than her cardiologist had predicted. She was managing it with medication, with careful attention to stress and exertion, and with a fierce, ironclad determination to not let a single person at her company know. She had watched what happened to leaders the moment they were perceived as vulnerable. She had seen her father's authority erode almost overnight when people found out about his knee surgeries, something as minor as knee surgeries. She was not going to give anyone the opportunity to circle her like that. She was not going to be looked at differently. She was not going to become an object of pity or a subject of hallway whispers or a reason for the board to start having conversations about succession planning before she was ready. So she said nothing. She took her medications at home, never at the office. She scheduled her cardiology appointments on Friday afternoons, telling Peggy she had personal errands. She managed her symptoms, the occasional dizziness, the fatigue that sometimes washed over her like a tide, with a discipline that was almost frightening. She had not told her ex-husband, from whom she'd been divorced for 6 years. She had not told her father. She had told exactly 2 people, her cardiologist, Dr. Anand Mehta, and her attorney, because she'd needed to update certain legal documents. What she had also not told anyone was that the prognosis had changed, that the most recent round of tests, conducted 8 weeks before the company's annual client appreciation retreat, had shown a significant decline. That Dr. Mehta had sat her down in his office with the kind of careful stillness that doctors adopt when they are preparing to say something irreversible, and had told her that they needed to seriously discuss the possibility that her heart might not hold for more than another year without intervention. That the intervention he was recommending, a surgical procedure combined with an aggressive treatment protocol, carried its own serious risks. That Victoria had sat in that office, listening to him, with her hands folded in her lap and her expression completely composed, and had said, "Thank you, Anand. I'll consider everything you've told me," and had walked out, taken the elevator to the parking garage, sat in her car, and cried in a way she hadn't cried since her mother's funeral 17 years ago. She had 1 year, maybe less, maybe more if the surgery went well, maybe less if it didn't. And in 6 days, she was supposed to lead Halcyon Maritime's annual client retreat aboard a chartered sailing vessel in the Gulf of Mexico, a tradition her father had started and that she had continued every year, entertaining the company's top clients with 2 days of sailing, fine dining, and carefully orchestrated relationship building. It was the kind of event that generated real business, the kind of goodwill that translated directly into contracts. She was not going to miss it. She was going to stand on that boat and be exactly what everyone needed her to be, and she was going to do it perfectly because that was what she did. She had assigned Daniel Mercer to accompany the retreat as the on-ground logistics coordinator. It was a reasonable choice. He was methodical, reliable, unflappable under pressure, and had handled the previous year's retreat coordination so smoothly that she had made a note about it in his personnel file. She did not know him well personally. He was not the kind of employee who sought out proximity to leadership. He did his job, he did it well, and he went home. She respected that. In the abstract way, she respected competent machinery. The morning they boarded the chartered vessel, a beautiful 60-foot sailing yacht called the Adriana, Daniel had been up since 4:30. He had packed Lily's bag the night before, arranged for her to stay with his mother, who had driven up from Georgia specifically for this, and had kissed his daughter approximately 11 times at drop-off, prompting Lily to push his face away with both hands and tell him, with tremendous 5-year-old authority, "Daddy, I'm fine. Go to work." He had laughed, a real laugh, the kind that reached his eyes, and driven to the marina feeling the particular mixture of relief and guilt that parents feel whenever they leave their children in good hands. Relief that he was getting a break, guilt for feeling relieved. The retreat was 14 clients and 8 Halcyon staff members aboard the Adriana, plus a crew of 4. The captain, a weathered Floridian named Roy Stanton, had been running charters in these waters for 20 years. The first day went beautifully. The weather was perfect, the clients were happy, Victoria moved through the social obligations of the day with the grace of someone born for exactly this. And watching her, even Daniel, who had never paid much attention to office politics or the theater of corporate relationship building, found himself thinking that whatever else she was remarkable at her job. She remembered every client's spouse's name, every child's age, every personal detail that had been mentioned in passing at previous events. She made each person feel singularly seen, which was, Daniel reflected, a particular kind of genius. He stayed mostly in the background, as was his role, managing the catering timeline, coordinating with the crew, ensuring that the day's itinerary ran exactly as planned. He and Victoria spoke perhaps 4 times during the course of the day, and each exchange was brief and professional. She called him Mercer. He called her Ms. Hale. They functioned like two well-maintained components of the same machine. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in his narrow bunk in the staff quarters and stared at the ceiling and thought about Lily. He thought about whether his mother remembered that Lily would only eat her oatmeal if there were exactly 3 drops of honey in it. Not 2, not 4, 3. He thought about the specific stuffed rabbit, whose name was Captain Flop, without whom Lily could not fall asleep, and whether he had remembered to pack Captain Flop, and then he remembered with a rush of relief that yes, Captain Flop was in the front pocket of Lily's bag. He thought about what the next year of his life would look like, whether he would ever feel less exhausted, whether the loneliness would always feel this much like a physical weight, whether Lily would grow up okay despite everything, whether he was enough, whether being enough was sufficient. At some point past midnight, he got up and went to the deck because the cabin felt too small for his thoughts. The Gulf was black and silver under a half moon, and the air was warm and salt thick, and it was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you're sad. Almost painfully so, the beauty sharp rather than comforting. He was standing at the stern railing when he heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Victoria Hale in a dark cardigan over her pajamas. Her hair down for the first time he'd ever seen it, which somehow made her look like an entirely different person. She stopped when she saw him, as surprised as he was. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No," he said. And then, because it seemed rude not to reciprocate, "You either."
No.
She came to stand at the railing a few feet from him, and they both looked out at the water for a moment in the particular silence of two people who don't know each other well enough to have a conversation but are too polite to immediately retreat. "Your daughter," Victoria said after a while. "She's 5. Daniel turned slightly. "Yes. How did you—" "Peggy mentioned it. She talks about your daughter occasionally. Says you have her picture on your desk." She paused. "What's her name?" "Lily." Something moved across Victoria's face then. It was brief, quickly controlled, but Daniel saw it, and he filed it away without knowing why. It looked, if he had to name it, like a very specific kind of longing. "That's a lovely name," she said. "She's a lovely kid," he said. And the warmth in his voice when he said it was unguarded and completely genuine. And he saw Victoria's expression shift again, something softening around the edges. They stood there for another few minutes, not saying much, just watching the water. Then Victoria said she was going back to sleep, and she left, and Daniel stayed on the deck for another hour, thinking about the way she had said, "That's a lovely name," with a quiet in her voice that didn't match the woman he thought he knew. The following morning, they set out for a small, uninhabited island about 2 hours from the main anchorage, a white sand crescent the captain called Pearl Key, which the charter company used as a lunch destination during retreats. The plan was to anchor offshore, ferry the guests to the beach by tender for a catered lunch, and return to the vessel by early afternoon. Simple, clean, well executed every year. The tender made 3 trips. Daniel went on the second trip, Victoria on the third, along with the last few clients. The lunch was set up beautifully on the beach. Tables under shade canopies, fresh seafood, chilled drinks, the whole production. Clients were happy. The sun was hot and cheerful. A couple of clients waded into the crystal-clear shallows. Everything was exactly as planned. 2 hours into the beach event, Daniel stepped away from the group to take a personal call from his mother. He walked down the beach around a slight curve in the shoreline, out of earshot. The call was brief. His mother just wanting to confirm the time of his return, and to report that Lily was running the entire household and showing absolutely no signs of missing you whatsoever, which I think is a good sign. He laughed and was walking back when he heard the sound of the tender's motor gunning hard, and looked up to see the small boat pulling away from the shore at full speed. He ran back around the curve in the beach and came to an abrupt, disorienting stop. The beach was empty, not just empty of guests, empty of everything. The catering tables were still there, partially. A few cups left in the sand. But the people were gone. He could see the tender far out in the water now, heading back toward the Adriana, which was visible in the distance. And he could see the distant forms of people on the main vessel's deck, which meant the guests were being loaded. They were leaving. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He walked in 3 different directions, holding it up. Nothing. He started waving his arms, but the tender was too far and moving away from him. What in the world? He spun around at the voice and found Victoria Hale standing 10 feet behind him. She was looking at the departing tender with an expression of total confusion. They left, Daniel said, still processing it himself. I can see that, she said. Why did they leave? I don't. He stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. They both looked at the tender, now just a speck in the distance. They had been left behind. Cliffhanger 2. Here is what Daniel did not know yet. Here is what would only become clear over the next several hours, and then the next several days. He did not know that the charter company's crew had miscounted passengers in the chaos of boarding. He did not know that the storm system that meteorologists had been tracking all week had shifted course faster than predicted, and that Captain Roy Stanton had made the call to pull up anchor and get offshore ahead of the weather, trusting that a head count had been done. He did not know that the storm was going to hit that island within 4 hours. But most importantly, most devastatingly, he did not yet know about Victoria's heart. And he did not know that by the time the sun rose on the third morning, she would say something to him in the pale light that would make him feel like the entire world had tilted on its axis and would never quite level back out again. The storm hit in the late afternoon, and it was serious. Not catastrophic. They were not in the direct path of the system, just the outer bands, but serious enough. Rain that came sideways, driven by wind that turned the palm trees at the island's interior edge into frantic gesturing shapes. They had found shelter quickly. Daniel had taken charge of that the moment he understood what was coming, pulling together what remained of the catering equipment, the tablecloths, the canopy frame, and fashioning, with a competence that surprised Victoria, a reasonable shelter against the leeward side of a rocky outcrop where the island's sparse tree line began. They had water, the sealed catering jugs, enough for several days if they were careful. They had food, what remained from lunch, packed into coolers, which was more than either of them expected. Daniel made systematic inventory of everything available and reported to Victoria with the calm efficiency of someone who is managing their panic by focusing on actionable tasks. Victoria watched him work and thought, I underestimated this man. They sat inside the makeshift shelter while the rain hammered down, and for the first hour they talked almost entirely about logistics. Could the Adriana's crew have realized the mistake by now? Almost certainly yes. Would they send rescue? Yes, but possibly not until the storm passed. Were there other vessels in the area? Possibly. Did either of them have any way of signaling? Not currently, but at first light Daniel planned to build a fire on the beach's high point. Then the logistics conversation ran out, as all logistics conversations eventually do, and they were left with the storm and the shelter and each other. Are you all right? Daniel asked. He asked it with genuine attention, in a way that felt different from a polite inquiry, and Victoria recognized the difference. I'm fine, she said, but she shifted slightly, and he noticed. Is it your back? The ground is. It's not my back, she said. And then, because she was who she was, and there was something about the total absence of performance opportunity that made certain things harder to perform. I have a heart condition. He looked at her. Nothing acute is happening, she said quickly. I'm not about to collapse. She paused. I take medication. I should take it with food, and I didn't bring my bag to the beach. It's on the boat. She stopped again. I'm telling you because you should know, in case something does happen. Not because I expect it to. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the silence of someone making sure they say the right thing. How serious is it? He asked. She looked at him. Nobody had asked her that with that specific quality of directness in 14 months. Not trying to soften it, not immediately jumping to reassurances, just asking the real question with the real words. Serious, she said. Okay, he said. He nodded, slowly. What do you need? Right now, tonight. What's the most important thing? Rest, she said. And to not be stressed. His mouth curved very slightly. You're stranded on an island in a storm without your medication. How's that going? And Victoria Hale, who had not laughed, truly laughed, in longer than she could remember, laughed. Startled her, the sound of it. It startled him too, and he smiled. And in the small, rain-loud space of that shelter, something shifted between them. Not romantic. Not yet. Just human. Just two people becoming visible to each other. They talked for hours that night. The storm kept them awake, and there was nothing to do but talk, and they did, in the careful, exploratory way of two people who have been formal with each other for a long time and are suddenly in a place where formality seems almost absurdly irrelevant. She asked him about Lily. Nobody at work ever asked him about Lily in a way that invited a real answer. They asked the way people ask about the weather, it's nice, right, great, and moved on. Victoria asked, and then she listened, truly listened, with the quality of attention she gave to the things she actually cared about. And Daniel found himself talking about his daughter in a way he rarely got to. Not the abbreviated version he gave in the break room, but the real version. He talked about the way Lily could identify every species of bird at the park near their house, because she'd spent months studying a bird book he'd bought her at a garage sale. He talked about how she'd cried for 20 minutes one evening because she'd accidentally stepped on an ant and was convinced she'd ruined the ant's entire family's day. He talked about how she told him every night, completely unprompted, "I love you more than all the birds, Daddy," which was, in Lily's personal scale of value, the highest possible declaration. Victoria was quiet for a moment after he said that. "She sounds extraordinary," she said. "She is," he said. "She's the most extraordinary person I've ever known. And I'm completely aware that every parent thinks that about their kid. But I think about it differently. I think even if I strip away the fact that she's mine and I love her, and I just look at her objectively, she's genuinely remarkable. She's so purely herself, you know. She hasn't learned yet to be anything other than exactly who she is." Victoria looked down at her hands. "That's a thing people lose," she said. "Being exactly who they are." "Did you lose it?" he asked. The directness of the question didn't offend her. It would have in the office. In the office, she would have found it presumptuous and inappropriate and would have shut it down with something precise and cool. But here, in the rain, on an island, with a man whose only agenda was clearly, transparently, to talk to her like a human being, it felt like something she'd been waiting for someone to ask her for a very long time. "Yes," she said. "A long time ago. What were you like before?" he asked. "Before you became—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Before I became Victoria Hale, terror of the maritime logistics sector," she offered dryly. He laughed. "I wasn't going to say it like that. But you were thinking it." "Absolutely," he said. She smiled. A real one. It changed her whole face, and Daniel saw, for the first time, something underneath the architecture of who she'd built herself to be. Something younger and much more fragile and somehow much more powerful for being fragile. She told him about growing up the daughter of Robert Hale, who loved her fiercely but had a very specific idea of what she should become. She told him about the summer she was 19 when she'd wanted to study marine biology. Not maritime commerce, actual marine biology, actual oceans and actual living things, and had spent a summer volunteering at a research station in the Keys and had been happier than she'd ever been before or since. She told him how her father had gradually, gently, consistently redirected her toward the business, and how she had loved him too much to fight it, and how she had made herself into exactly what the business needed and had been, for the most part, successful and even proud of herself, but that there were mornings, even now, even as the CEO of a company her father had built and she had grown, when she woke up and thought about the Keys and the research station and the particular way the light fell on the water there in the early morning, and felt a grief so specific and so old that it had its own address inside her chest. Daniel listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, the rain had begun to ease slightly. The worst of the storm was passing. The air smelled of salt and wet sand and something green from the island's interior. "I'm sorry," he said, and then, not in a pitying way, in the way where I'm sorry that happened to you. It sounds like you gave up something you really loved." "Lots of people do," she said. "That doesn't make it less sad," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "I suppose it doesn't." The next morning broke clear and beautiful, with the particular dazzling quality of post-storm Gulf mornings where the water is bright as hammered metal and the air feels washed clean. Daniel was up before first light. He built a signal fire on the island's highest sandy point, using driftwood left by the storm and pages from a small scheduling notebook he'd had in his pocket, which he turned into kindling. He fed the fire carefully until it was burning high and clean. Then he found large pieces of dark dried kelp and laid them across the fire at intervals to produce dark smoke that would be visible from distance. He brought food and water to Victoria, who was awake and sitting outside the shelter watching the ocean with the thoughtful expression of someone rearranging something inside themselves. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she said. "I slept, actually. I can't remember the last time I slept without medication to help me." "The island's quiet," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." They ate in comfortable silence, an extraordinary thing because comfortable silences require trust, and trust between them had been built, astonishingly, almost entirely between midnight and dawn. Daniel spent the morning building a secondary signal on the beach itself, large letters in the sand, using pieces of palm frond and driftwood. Help SOS, large enough to be visible from the air. He worked steadily, methodically, without complaint or drama. Victoria watched him from her spot by the shelter, and she thought about what it took to be the kind of man who, when crisis arrived, simply got quiet and got to work. She had known many competent people. She had never known anyone who was competent in exactly this way, without ego in it, without any need for recognition, just solving the problem because the problem needed solving. She thought about how invisible he'd been to her, at the office, for 3 years. She thought about that with something close to shame. Around midday, she walked to where he was working on a second fire site at the island's southern tip, carrying 2 bottles of water. She handed him one without comment, and he took it and drank and nodded his thanks. And they stood together looking out at the water, which was busy with whitecaps from the storm's trailing wind. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah. What do you want? For your life. Not for Lily. For you." He was quiet. He turned the water bottle in his hands. "I want Lily to be okay," he said. "I said not for Lily." He was quiet for longer this time, and she could see him actually searching for the answer, actually reaching inside himself and finding that the room she was asking about had been dark and unused for so long that it was hard to see what was in there. "I want to feel like I matter," he said finally. "Not to anyone specific, necessarily. Just," he stopped. "I want to feel like I'm a person, not just a function. Like I'm not just the logistics coordinator and the single dad and the guy whose wife left. I want someone to know me." He paused. "That's embarrassing to say out loud." "It's not," she said. "It's the most human thing I've heard in years." He looked at her. "What do you want?" She had opened the door to this conversation, and she knew he would ask. She had known he would ask before she even came to stand beside him with the water. That was why she came. "I want a year," she said, very quietly. "Just one more year. A real one. Not meetings and reports and board calls. A real year." She looked at the ocean. "I want to go back to the Keys. I want to watch the sun come up over the water like I used to. I want to—" She stopped, and he saw the muscles of her jaw tighten as she held herself together. "I want things I waited too long to want." The way she said it made something cold move through him, and he thought about the conversation the night before, about her condition, about how serious it was, and without planning to, he said, "Victoria, how long do you have?" She turned to look at him, and for a moment, just a moment, her face was completely unguarded. Everything was there. The fear, the grief, the quiet, furious unfairness of it, the loneliness of carrying it alone. "My doctor thinks perhaps a year," she said. "Without surgery, perhaps less. With surgery," she took a breath. "It's complicated." He said nothing for a long time. He stood beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say and he was wise enough to know it. Then, slowly, he reached out and put his hand over hers where it rested on the water bottle. She looked down at their hands. She did not pull away. The rescue came that afternoon. A Coast Guard vessel that had been searching for them since the Adriana's crew realized their catastrophic mistake the previous evening. The reunion was efficient and professional. There was an examination of both of them by a medic on board. Victoria mentioned her condition to the medic quietly, with Daniel beside her, which was the first time she had told anyone under circumstances where someone who already knew was present, and having someone beside her who knew, she realized, was different. felt different in her chest. Less like a stone and more like something she could breathe around. The clients had been safely transported to port the previous evening. Victoria's assistant Peggy had apparently spent the night in a state of controlled panic. Captain Roy Stanton had aged visibly in 24 hours. On the Coast Guard vessel, riding back toward Tampa, Daniel and Victoria sat on deck and didn't talk much. There was something protective about the silence, like talking too much would disturb something that had settled between them and needed to be treated gently. At one point, Daniel's phone connected to Signal and lit up with approximately 47 messages, mostly from Marcus and his mother, and one from a number he'd given Lily's grandmother's landline as a contact, where Lily had left a voice message that began, "Daddy, this is me, Lily. I am calling because Grandma said you were on an island and I wanted to tell you that Captain Flop and me are fine, and also I saved an ant today from the bathtub, so I think I am making up for the ant I hurt." He played the message with his phone pressed to his ear and his eyes closed, and when it ended he sat very still for a moment. Victoria was watching him. "She called you?" she asked. "Left a voice message," he said. He looked at her with eyes that were slightly brighter than usual. "She saved an ant from the bathtub." Victoria smiled. A warm, unguarded, complete smile. "She's incredible," she said. "Yeah," he said. "She really is." The weeks that followed the island were strange and not strange. Work returned to its regular rhythms. Daniel went back to his logistics spreadsheets and his pickup truck and Lily's bedtime stories. Victoria went back to her office and her board calls and her precisely constructed sentences. But something had changed between them that the return to regular life couldn't quite close over. She started stopping by his desk occasionally. Not for work reasons. Or not only for work reasons. She would ask about Lily and he would tell her something, and she would listen in that particular attentive way that he'd come to understand was her natural state when she was genuinely interested, stripped of the performance of her professional self. He started to notice small things, the way she held her coffee cup with both hands when she was tired, the way she rubbed the back of her neck when she was working through a complicated problem, the way she sometimes paused at the window of his office as she was walking past without quite stopping, as if deciding something. He wasn't sure what was happening between them, only that it was something, and that it felt as fragile and necessary as a pilot light, the small flame that makes everything else possible. He didn't push it. He understood, without having to think it through carefully, that she was navigating something enormous. The news about her health, the confrontation with her own life's shape, the particular vertigo of being a person who has been alone with a big secret for a long time and has suddenly let someone else hold a corner of it. He gave her space. He showed up consistently. He was simply, steadily present. He did not tell her what he was beginning to feel, not directly, not yet. He was not sure he had the right. She was his boss. She was managing a serious illness. She had enough to carry without him adding the weight of his own feelings to the pile. He kept it quiet inside himself, the way he kept so many things, and turned it over in the private space of late evenings after Lily was asleep. One Saturday, about a month after the island, he ran into her at the botanical garden where he and Lily spent most of their weekend mornings. He was crouched beside Lily in front of a garden bed where a small bird, some kind of wren, had landed about 3 feet away and was apparently untroubled by their presence. He heard footsteps on the gravel path and looked up, and there was Victoria, in jeans and a light jacket, her hair loose, looking as surprised to see him as he was to see her. "Oh," she said. Lily looked up. "Hi," Lily said, with the immediate, unguarded friendliness of 5-year-olds. "Do you like birds?" Victoria looked at this child, this small, bright, enormously self-possessed child with her father's dark eyes and a bird-watching focus beyond her years, and something in Victoria Hale's face did something that Daniel had never quite seen it do before. It did not break exactly. It opened. "I love birds," Victoria said. She crouched down to Lily's level. "What kind is this one?" "Carolina wren," Lily said with total authority. "You can tell from the white stripe over the eye and the barring on the wings. Also the tail points up. They're very confident birds."
"Confident birds," Victoria repeated.
"Yes. Some birds are shy. Not this one." Lily looked at her father. "Daddy, this is a nice lady." "This is Ms. Hale," Daniel said. She's my boss at work." "Oh," Lily said, and turned back to the wren with perfect democratic indifference. Victoria straightened up and looked at Daniel, and she was blinking more than usual, which he had learned was what she did when she was trying not to feel something too much. "She's exactly like you described," Victoria said. "More so in person," he said. They walked the garden for an hour, the three of them. Lily provided an authoritative commentary on every bird they encountered. Victoria listened with such genuine absorption that Lily, who had an excellent instinct for the difference between real attention and performed attention, adopted Victoria immediately and completely, at one point taking her hand to pull her toward a pond where she had previously spotted what she claimed was either a great blue heron or just a really big, sad-looking bird. It was a great blue heron. Daniel watched his daughter and his boss walk ahead of him, holding hands toward a pond in the morning sunlight, and he felt something so large and warm and terrifying move through him that he had to stop walking for a moment and just breathe. It was Peggy who told him 2 weeks later. He didn't ask her to. She came to his office and closed the door behind her and sat down across from him with the expression of a woman who has been sitting on something too heavy for too long. "She's getting worse," Peggy said. "I know she hasn't told me directly, but I've watched her for 22 years, Daniel. I know when she's struggling." Peggy's hands were folded tightly in her lap. "She's scheduled surgery. I found the insurance pre-authorization on the printer by accident last week. She doesn't know I know." Daniel was quiet. "She has no one," Peggy said. "That's the thing. She has no one who is going to sit in that waiting room. Her father doesn't know. She has no family close by. She has colleagues and clients and acquaintances. She doesn't have anyone who—" Peggy stopped. "I don't know what you two are to each other, but I saw the way she talked about that island, and the way she looks when she comes back from talking to you. And I'm telling you because someone should know." After Peggy left, Daniel sat at his desk for a long time. He thought about the Coast Guard boat, and the way she'd let him put his hand over hers. He thought about the botanical garden and Lily and the great blue heron. He thought about a woman who had spent 14 months carrying a death sentence in absolute isolation and had never once flinched where anyone could see. He picked up his phone and called her. Not texted. Called. She answered on the third ring, sounding slightly surprised. "Mercer. I know about the surgery," he said. A long silence. "Peggy?" she asked. "It doesn't matter," he said.
Victoria.
"When is it?" Another silence. He could hear her breathing. 3 weeks, she said. "Who's going to be there?" he said. "I have a car service arranged for—" "I mean in the waiting room," he said. "Who's going to be in the waiting room?" The silence this time was different. It had a particular quality, like the moment before weather changes, the way the air goes still and heavy. "That's not necessary," she said, very quietly. "I know it's not necessary," he said. "I'm asking who's going to be there." "Daniel?" And the sound of his first name in her voice, which was not something that had ever happened before, was something he felt in his sternum. "I'm going to be there," he said. "Okay, I'm going to be in that waiting room. And you don't have to do anything with that information. You don't have to say anything about it. But I need you to know." She didn't say anything for so long that he thought the call might have dropped. Then, "I've never had," she stopped. "I don't know how to let people—" "I know," he said. "You don't have to know how. I'm just going to show up. You just have to let me." He was there. 3 weeks later, 5:30 in the morning, in the waiting area of Tampa General's cardiac surgery wing, with 2 coffees in a carrier and a bag from the bakery near his house and his reading glasses because he'd brought a book he knew he wouldn't be able to concentrate on. He was there when they wheeled her past in a hospital bed, and he stood up and she looked at him and he could see what it cost her to let herself look at him the way she looked at him in that moment, with everything she had and no protective distance. He gave her a small nod, and she held his gaze for a moment, and then they wheeled her around the corner. He sat down. He opened his book. He didn't read a word. He sat in that chair for 6 hours, and twice he called his mother to check on Lily, and once he got up and walked to the window and stood there looking at the parking lot, not seeing it. And he thought about the island and the fire he'd built on the sand and the way she'd said, "I want a year," like it was a wish she was making to someone who might not grant it. The surgery went well. Dr. Mehta came to the waiting room at nearly noon and said the procedure had been successful, and that the recovery would be significant, but that the prognosis was substantially improved. That the odds had shifted. That they had reason to be hopeful. Daniel sat back down in his chair and put his face in his hands for about 30 seconds. When they let him into recovery, she was pale and small in the hospital bed in a way that was shocking after knowing her as she usually was, and her eyes were heavy with anesthesia. But when he sat down beside her, she turned her head and looked at him, and she said, very quietly, in a voice still thick from sedation, "You were there." "I was there," he said. "The whole time. The whole time." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. And it wasn't skepticism. It was genuine, wondering, vulnerable inquiry, the question of someone who has lived so long without someone staying that they can't quite parse why someone would. "Because that's what you do," he said. "For people who matter to you." She closed her eyes. He thought she might be falling back to sleep. Then she said, without opening her eyes, "I matter to you." "Victoria," he said, very gently. "Yes." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he thought she really had fallen asleep. Then her hand moved on the blanket and found his, and she held it without saying anything else, and they stayed like that. Cliffhanger 3. Now here is the moment. This is what the title promised you. This is the request that brought us all here. It happened 6 weeks into her recovery, on a Tuesday evening when Daniel brought dinner to her house. He had been doing this twice a week, bringing food, sitting with her while she ate, talking, sometimes bringing Lily, who had immediately claimed Victoria's living room as an extension of her personal territory and had begun keeping a spare bird book there. Victoria was getting stronger. The color was coming back. She moved more slowly than before, but with less of the tightly controlled effort that he now understood had been her body fighting itself for over a year. She was more like herself, the self she was on the island, the self behind the person she performed. She laughed more easily. She argued with him sometimes about small things, and he loved it. Loved that she was comfortable enough to disagree, to be sharp, to be real. Something between them had become, without any formal declaration, something. He did not know quite what to call it, and neither, he suspected, did she, and they had been holding that unnamed thing with care, not rushing it, not labeling it prematurely. And then on that Tuesday evening, after dinner, while Lily was asleep on the couch with Captain Flop and a bird documentary playing softly on the television, Victoria turned to him and said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever your answer is, it won't change anything between us." He had looked at her, and she had taken a breath, and she had said something he never, in any version of any story he could have told about his life, would have predicted. "I want to adopt a child," she said. He looked at her. "I know," she said quickly. "I know what you're thinking. I know about the medical situation, and I know I'm 41, and I know I'm not. I know this isn't what people expect from me. But I've been thinking about it since before the surgery, and the surgery made me think about it more, not less, and I need to say it out loud to someone, and I need that someone to be honest with me." She stopped. Her eyes were very steady on his, in that way she had when she was being completely, unflinchingly serious. "I've been in contact with an adoption agency. There's a little girl. She's 4. Her name is..." Her voice caught just for a second. "Her name is Mara. She's been in the foster system for 2 years. Her file says she loves books and birds." He stared at her. "I know it's complicated," she said. "The medical history is a concern for the agency. I've been working with Dr. Mehta to provide documentation of my current prognosis, which is substantially better. I have the resources. I have the home. I want this. I have wanted this for longer than I knew." She looked down at Lily, asleep on her couch, and then back at him. "But I'm scared. And I've never been the kind of person who asked for help. And I'm asking now." She met his eyes. "I'm asking if you'll help me. Be present. Be someone who Mara can see. Who she can know is there. Not because I'm asking you to be her father or to be anything that..." She stopped again. "I don't know what I'm asking exactly. I just know I can't do this alone, and I don't want to, and you're the person I trust. You're the person I trust more than anyone." Daniel sat very still for a long moment. He thought about a woman standing on a deck in the middle of the night, her hair down for the first time he'd seen it, saying, "That's a lovely name," in a voice with a very specific kind of longing in it. He thought about her saying, "I want a year, a real one." He thought about a little girl named Mara who loved books and birds and had been waiting for someone for 2 years. He thought about Lily, asleep on this woman's couch with her stuffed rabbit, completely at home. He looked at Victoria and she looked back at him, and he could see everything she was: the CEO and the marine biologist she never got to be, the daughter and the ex-wife and the woman who'd been alone with her own secret for over a year, the person who'd laughed in a storm shelter and held his hand on a Coast Guard boat and said, "You were there," in a voice that made it sound like a miracle. "I'm not going to just be present," he said. She blinked. "I mean, yes," he said. "I'll help. I'll be there. But I'm not going to be someone who just kind of orbits this situation from a safe distance, Victoria. If we're doing this," he paused. He looked at her with complete steadiness, with the same straightforward honesty that had been the foundation of everything between them since the island. "I want to do this. All of it. I want to be someone that Mara knows and trusts. I want that for both of our kids. And I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want to stop being careful about what I say to you. I think you know what I mean." She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Something so open it was almost hard to look at directly. "I think I know what you mean," she said. "Then I'm saying it," he said. "Clearly, so there's no ambiguity. I love you. I think I've been falling in love with you since you stood on the deck of a boat in the middle of the night and looked at the water and said nothing. And if you don't feel—" "Daniel," she said. "Yeah. I feel." He was quiet. "I feel quite a lot," she said, with the small, careful precision of someone who was saying enormous things in small words, and it was the most Victoria Hale thing she had ever said, and he smiled with his whole face, the way he smiled when Lily did something extraordinary, and she saw it and something in her face came apart in the best possible way. The months that followed were not without complication. They were honest about their relationship to HR, which involved a conversation that Daniel was not sorry to have behind him. Victoria stepped back from her direct supervisory role over Daniel's department and appointed a team lead for that division, which was something she'd been planning to do anyway as the company grew, and which resolved any professional conflict in a way that was clean and above board. There were conversations, some easy, some less so, about what their lives were going to look like together, what pace made sense, what Lily needed, what Mara would need. Mara came home to Victoria's house on a Thursday afternoon in the early spring. She was small and serious and had hair that wouldn't quite lie flat and an expression of watchful assessment that was, Victoria would later say, very much like looking in a mirror. She had a book with her. When Lily, who had been briefed extensively on this occasion and had prepared for it with the gravitas of a diplomat, said, "I heard you like birds." Mara looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Do you?" "I know every bird in Florida," Lily said. "I can teach you." Mara considered this. "Okay," she said. They were in the backyard within 20 minutes. Daniel stood in the kitchen with Victoria and they watched through the glass door as their daughters. And they were that, from this moment they were that, stood together in the afternoon light examining something in the garden, Lily pointing and explaining with great authority, Mara listening and beginning very slightly to lean in. He put his arm around Victoria. She leaned against him. "You know what Lily told me last week?" he said. "What?" She said, "Daddy, I think Victoria is our family now." He paused. Then she went back to her book, like it was obvious. Like it was just a thing that was true. Victoria was quiet for a moment. He felt her breathe. "Out of the mouths of babes," she said very softly. "She's usually right about these things," he said. "She identified that great blue heron from 40 feet," Victoria said. "She's a remarkable scientist," he said. "She's her father's daughter," Victoria said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside in the garden, Lily was showing Mara something in the bird book, and Mara was pointing at the page with one small finger, and the afternoon light was coming through the leaves of the oak tree at the corner of the garden, and the sound of children's voices was threading through the warm air of an ordinary, extraordinary day. The final note of this story is this. Daniel Mercer, who had spent 3 years moving through the narrow corridor between work and fatherhood, feeling invisible as a gear in a machine, found himself on an island in the Gulf of Mexico because someone forgot to count heads. It should never have happened. It was chaos and accident and bad weather. And it was also, if you believe in such things, and after hearing this story I think maybe you do, exactly what was supposed to happen. Victoria Hale, who had been carrying a year's worth of her own death in total isolation, found the only door she'd left even slightly open was the one she hadn't planned to. And the man who walked through it did not ask her to be anything other than who she was. He did not need her to be strong. He did not need her to perform. He just needed her to be there, and she was. They did not save each other. That's not how this works, and that's not what this story is saying. They were each already trying to save themselves in the ways they knew how. What they gave each other was something different from saving. What they gave each other was witness. They saw each other, really saw each other, in the storm and the shelter and the long night and the morning after, and they chose, with full knowledge of the complications and the costs and the uncertainties, to keep looking. Two little girls, one who knows every bird in Florida and one who is learning, grew up in the particular shelter of being truly seen. And sometimes, late in the evening, after the children are in bed and the house is quiet, Daniel and Victoria sit together and they don't talk, and the silence between them is the good kind. The kind that has weight and warmth in it. The kind that means, I am here, you are here, this is real, and that, after everything, is more than enough. If the story moved you, if it reminded you that the most unexpected places can be where we find the most important things, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. It means more than you know, and it helps us keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, being truly seen by even one person is one of the most powerful things that can happen in a human life.